Hey everyone, we're on Unit 6A and this is Topic 3. We are going to study interval notation and domain. We have already studied interval notation in Unit 5, so this first part right here should be a review. So first what we're going to do is just look at this first inequality, x is greater than -3, and we're going to sketch it on a number line graph. I'm going to go ahead and just draw 3 number lines because I'm going to graph all 3 of these here. Alright, so again, this says x is greater than -3. So when I sketch this, I'm going to put a tick mark on my graph and make that -3. I know that there's values to the right and there's values to the left, and I want to sketch where all of the values that are greater than -3 are. So on -3, I'm going to put a circle, and to determine whether I shade in the circle or leave it open, I look at this symbol, and since it is just greater than, I'm not going to shade it in, I'm going to leave it open. And I'm going to shade all the values that are to the right of -3. So that should be a little bit of a recap for you. And the other thing that should also be a recap is how we write interval notation. Interval notation is just when we read our number line right here, and I read it from left to right. So the furthest left is this point right here, so that's -3. And as I go to the right, I have an arrow going to the right, which means I'm going towards positive infinity. So my interval is -3 to infinity. And what we learned in Unit 5 is that we always use parentheses unless we have a shaded in circle. So I'm going to use parentheses right there. Alright, so the next one I have 2 is greater than or equal to x, which means 2 is bigger than all of the values that I'm going to shade. I'm going to actually write this the other way as well. I'm going to just switch this because I like to put the x first and the 2 second. And then if I switch that, I have to make sure that it's still pointing at the x. So that means the same thing as x is less than or equal to 2. So I'm going to put a tick mark here. I'm going to put the number 2. I know there's values to the right and the left. And I want to shade all the values less than or equal to 2. So I'm going to circle 2. Since it's less than or equal, that means 2 is included. I'm going to shade it in. And then less than means I'm going to shade to the left. Notice that my arrow is pointing to the left, which means that when I read this from left to right, -infinity is my starting value. So I'm going to do -infinity to 2. And since 2 is shaded in, it gets a bracket. Alright, lastly, this is a combination of 2 intervals. It says -4 is less than or equal to x, which is less than 0. So from left to right, I'm going to put these 2 values on my number line, -4. Then I can have some tick marks here, -3, -2, -1, 0. This would be 0, and then it would continue. So I know that at -4, I need a closed circle. At 0, I need an open circle. And x is in between those 2 values, which means I just shade right in the middle of those 2. So the domain for this, from left to right, is -4 to 0. So I'm going to write that -4 to 0, and I'm going to leave a bracket and then a parenthesis, so it's a combination of both. Alright, so for the definition of domain, we reviewed interval notation because we're going to use interval to write the domain. So the domain is the interval of all possible inputs, and I'm just going to put in parentheses here, inputs are x values. So all possible x values of a function. And I'm just going to write here that something that I like to think about is from left to right, how wide is the function? Okay, so now we're going to just look at a couple examples of that. The key I want you to remember is that when we talk about domain, we are talking about a interval. So our answer is always going to be an interval, just like our intervals were up here. That's why we reviewed these. Alright, so example 1. So in example 1, remember our answer is going to be an interval down here for domain, and it's an interval of all of the x values. So what I like to do actually is just scribble out the y values all together, because sometimes it's hard to ignore them, and my answer is going to be one of these x values. So I'm going to scribble out the y values so I'm not tempted to use them. Alright, so the next thing I want to look at is these arrows on our graph. So that's really important. These arrows on this graph are kind of going diagonally, like this one is going diagonally up and to the right. So it really means it's going in two directions. It's going up forever and also to the right forever. And this arrow over here on the left is going up and to the left. So it's going up forever and to the left forever. Now remember, we are only focused on our x values. And our x values are left and right on the x-axis. So since this graph is going to the left forever and to the right forever, it really means that our domain goes to the left forever and to the right forever. Anytime you see arrows on both ends of the graph, your domain is always going to look like negative infinity to infinity. Alright, so let's look at example 2, and a couple things I want you to notice about example 2 is there are no arrows, first of all. So we are not going to go to the left forever and to the right forever. And the other thing I want you to notice about the ends of this graph is that they are closed circles. So closed circles in comparison to if the end of this graph had like an open circle. But you can really see that that circle right here is shaded in and shaded in. Alright, so since that graph is shaded in and it has a starting point, I'm going to cross off the y values, because I'm not going to pay attention to those, and I'm going to look at the x value right here where it starts. That x value is negative 3. Then I'm going to look at the x value where it stops, and that's positive 3. And then going back to what I said earlier about these being closed circles, that means that I'm going to use a bracket for my domain right there, negative 3 to 3. So it means that this graph has the inputs of this graph start at negative 3 and end at positive 3. There are no inputs outside of those values. Alright, you guys are doing, I believe right now it's homework number, it's either 3 or 4, I think it's 4, homework number 4 to practice this. Good luck.